start the clock.
Good afternoon. At the tone, time will be
Real time.
at the tone, time will be
Real time.
Before you actually do the test, you should pay very close attention to several factors. Notice on this page that it clearly tells you the time, 25 minutes, and the number of questions, 23 questions. This is a little odd. Most of the verbal tests are 24 questions. Occasionally you do get 23 questions or 25 questions. Normally it's 24. In this case it's a little less. The next thing you should notice is that this section always starts off with sentence completions. You should notice more than that. In this particular test, it starts off with 5 sentence completions. On the verbal sections, you'll either get 5 sentence completions at the beginning or 8 sentence completions at the beginning, and the very last verbal test that you take will be a total of 6 sentence completions. This is 5 sentence completions. Now that means that number 1 and 2 will be relatively easy, 3 will be medium, and 4 and 5 will be difficult. So don't think, well, it's only number 4, I should be getting it, it's easy. No, on this test, number 4 and 5 are going to be relatively difficult. This test pursued a similar pattern to all sentence completions that have 5 questions. Number 1 was a level 1. Remember, there's 5 levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Level 1 is easy, level 5 is difficult. Question 1 was in fact a level 1. Question 2 was a level 2. Question 3 was a level 3. And questions 4 and 5 were level 5, so very, very difficult. There are relatively few surprises on the sentence completions. This is the pattern you should expect, especially when you have a 5-question sentence completions. You should understand that you have to get numbers 1 and 2 if you want an average SAT score. Numbers 1 and 2 are simple. You need to get that. If you want a 500, you have to get 1 and 2. If you want a fairly good SAT score, you have to get 1, 2, and 3. By fairly good, we're talking about higher than average, anywhere from a 500 to a 600. Maybe even a 650, you can get away with only getting number 1, 2, and 3. And if you want a great SAT score, you're going to have to get 4 or 5 of these. By great, I mean in the 700 levels. Let's look at numbers 1 through 5 very carefully and see what problems you would have to face. If you're really good with the SAT verbal component of the test, don't poo-poo and say, I don't have to worry about number 1s and 2s because I'm easily going to get number 1s and 2s. There's something to learn, even for the best student, even on the easiest questions. So let's begin. Let's take a look at number 1. Number 1 is easy. It should be easy. After all, it is number 1. However, on first look, this may appear very difficult. A lot of people think it's difficult because they think the sentence completions is all about semantics. Semantics is the study of word meaning. In other words, if you see the letters C-A-T, cat, you know that it refers to a furry little mammal that goes meow. So when a student looks at this question and sees words such as inveterate, that's in the question itself, and then they look down and see the choices iconoclast, connoisseur, procrastinator, protege, and misanthrope, they see a lot of words that are difficult semantically. They just don't know the meaning of those words. But, and this is a very important but, there's something more about the sentence completions than semantics. Everybody thinks they have problems because their vocabulary is poor. That's not completely the case. There's also this aspect of language called syntax. Broadly speaking, syntax is the study of the rules of the formation of sentences in a language. It's the sentences and the phrases and the patterns of words, and that's probably more of an issue to most students than mere semantics, the mere meaning of words. However, people focus on semantics rather than syntax. Number one is a good example where syntax really takes control. The reason people worry about semantics is it's obvious. Syntax sometimes operates in the back of our minds. It's not so obvious. The fact that there's not so much a semantic issue with the word inveterate is very clear because you can solve this problem by using syntax. Let us look at number one and see how this occurs. The sentence reads, according to his supervisor, Kenji was an inveterate blank, colon. Most students realize when you set that up, the pattern is that after that colon, you are going to define what the blank is. That blank will actually mean he habitually put off doing his work until the last minute. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, many high school students are familiar with the word procrastination because they have been accused of this activity or lateness of activity. You hand in papers late, you do your studies at the last second, you'll be accused by your parents or teachers or some other authority figure of being a procrastinator. And that's exactly what you needed in this particular case. In the choices A, B, C, D, and E, you wanted a blank that meant being late, and a lot of students actually were familiar with the word procrastinate, and they were able to get it. That's why this is easy. Although we have solved what the correct answer is, C, procrastinator, let's take a look at the semantic issues that we really didn't have to look at in number one. This is a good way of developing your semantic expertise that you might need later on the more difficult questions on the actual SAT tests that you will take. Choice A was iconoclast. An iconoclast is a person who attacks traditional beliefs, traditional institutions. Iconoclast comes from two Greek words, ikonos meaning image and klastos meaning breaker. The word itself has religious and historical overtones that you do not need to know for this test, but it's important to understand a lot of the words that you'll learn to develop come from very typical Greek, Latin, and French roots. I would say that close to 90% of all of the complicated words you'll learn come from those three language groups, Greek, Latin, and French. Some of you might already be familiar with parts of the word iconoclast. An icon that you see on your computer is an image. If you think about it, that's all it is. So it's a good way of remembering. If you already know part of a word, a root of a word, you sort of can keep that in mind in order to learn a lot of other more complicated words. Choice B was connoisseur. It sounds French, it is. Connoisseur is somebody who has a excellent knowledge and understanding of a particular subject. You can be a connoisseur of wine, a connoisseur of fine dining, a connoisseur of art. The word itself, although from French origins, is derived from Latin. You'll notice that a lot of the French words we have were evolved from the Romance language Latin. The original Latin had a root cognere, which meant to know. So we went from the Latin cogno to the French conno, and it still means being in the know. Choice D was the word protege. You can see from all the weird accent marks that it's probably French. Like many other words, the French word connoisseur that we use in English originally comes from a Latin word. The Latin word protogere meant to protect, and you can still sort of see that word protect in protege, and that's exactly what proteges do. You'll notice that a protege is somebody who is a person who is under the protection or care of another. And choice E was the word misanthrope, one of my favorite words. A misanthrope is somebody who more or less is a hater of humankind. This word comes from the Greek. The prefix mis means ill or mistaken or wrong, and we get a lot of words in English that start with mis. Mistrial, misprint, mistrust is a very common prefix. And the root word anthros is a common word meaning man. We get all sorts of words in English. One that comes to mind first is anthropology, which is the study of man. You get a lot of others. Philanthropic, which is the love of mankind, and so forth. Important roots, important prefixes. Try to keep a list of them and your vocabulary will grow. We spent a lot of time on number 1. We'll speed up the pace a little bit. Let's look at number 2. Question number 2 is still simple. It's a little bit more difficult than number 1. And the vocabulary is clearly simpler than that found on number 1. But it's a little bit harder, mainly because of that issue of syntax. Most of the vocabulary can easily be understood. There are only a few words that present any major problem. Most of them are just minor problems. I think most students understand decorative and devotional and ritualistic. Utilitarian is a broad word, comes from utility or usefulness. If you understand that, that's probably all you need to know. Some students might have a problem with the word aesthetic. That just means a theory of beauty, or in general just the concept of beauty. Please also be careful with choice E, cosmetic. We think of the word cosmetics as something people put on their face. Cosmetic in its broadest implication is something that covers up in an artificial or superficial manner. So the semantics, the difficulty of word meaning here is not too complicated. The syntax is a little bit more complicated in this. Fortunately, most students would pick up on the syntax issue of number 2, and they don't even realize what they're doing. But I want you to realize it, because on some of these sentence completion problems, you're going to have to understand the mechanics of syntax rather than just rely on your gut instinct. So let's look at number 2's syntax issue. The first thing you should recognize about the syntax of number 2 is the word although. Although is a common word used to indicate contrast or differences, especially when you're comparing two things. So you know you're going to compare things, and that helps set up the structure of the sentence. Although pre-Columbian jewelry often incorporated complex religious symbolism. Let's pause here for just a second. You may or may not understand the concept of pre-Columbian jewelry. It's not important. Pre-Columbian means before 1492, when Columbus discovered the New World, and it recognizes the fact that there was cultures that existed in North and South America before the advent of Europeans settling North and South America. Try not to get caught up in these little distractions, they're not necessary. When looking at the issue of syntax, you need to look at the core. Let's look at the core of question number 2. The really essential parts of the question reads as follows. Although something is religious, its function was generally more blank than blank. What we have here is a very important syntax clue. To illustrate this clue, let's forget about this particular sentence for just a minute and look at a similar syntax related sentence. Although small, it was more blank than blank. Well, what exactly does that mean when you have a sentence written in that structure? We've gotten rid of the content of question number 2 and just looking at the form. Although small, it was more blank than blank. What does that do to the 2 blanks? The syntax of this makes it necessary that the second blank be somehow related to the word small. The way syntax works in this particular situation is that it forces the second blank to be related to the word small. You can't just put in anything. You could say, for example, although small, it was more skinny than short, and that would work perfectly well. There's a lot of things that would work really, really well. The syntax of this sentence forces you to relate that second blank to the word short. Let's see how that compares to the original sentence. Although religious, its function was generally more blank than blank. We need the second blank to somehow relate with something religious. Looking at the entire question again and focusing on the second word of each choice, we're given the following options. Devotional in choice A, utilitarian in choice B, aesthetic in C, practical in D, and conspicuous in E. The best word to use in this particular case is devotional. Religion is very related to the idea of being devoted to one's God. Furthermore, it reinforces the concept that jewelry was just not religious, it was decorative. It was for fashion. I think the problem that many students have with sentence completions is they have little understanding of the remarkable process of how your brain understands language. Amazingly, most of the time when we're speaking, we don't even have to think very consciously about how we're putting words together. It just happens. It's really rather incredible. For the most part, many students are putting this all together and they don't even think about it. Good students just naturally understand this because they have all sorts of good linguistic tools they've developed. They understand how language works. Students whose native language is not English or who are fundamentally weak with language have a more difficult time understanding how language and words fit together. It's not an issue of semantics, it's an issue of syntax. Let's go on to number 3. Number 3 is a level 3. That means it's a question of average difficulty.
Typical of number threes, it has a little bit of a issue in syntax and a little bit of an issue in semantics. Let's look at the semantic issues first. Circumspect comes from two Latin words. Circum meaning around, spect means to look, spectare. We use both words in many ways. Circumference meaning round, spect as in spectator or spectacular or spectacles, to look. If you look around, you're probably being careful, and that's generally what circumstance means. Fervor is an interesting word, again from the Latin. It means great warmth or being very honest and earnest. It comes to us from the French, but again, if you go further back, it comes from Latin. And actually, fervent or fervent or actually meant heat. So we use the word in a metaphorical way. With warmth, does not mean that you're hot. It means that you literally have emotional warmth. In choice C, you have the word equanimity. Comes again from Latin. We get the word equa, which means equal. Most people know that. The last part of the word comes from animus, which meant spirit. If you're of equal spirit, of calm spirit. You can find the root animus in quite a few words. Animation, and even the word animal, so something with a spirit in it. Basically means you're emotionally stable or calm, even under tension or strain. The only other word that had any level of semantic difficulty was capriciousness. Capriciousness basically means, it's usually a negative word. It means that have whims, you are subject to erratic behavior, maybe vindictive behavior. The word is almost always used in a negative way. Strangely, it comes not from Latin, nor French, nor Greek. It comes directly from the Italian. So figure that one out. It's a word that you probably need to know if you ever get married. The other words in number 3 are quite simple. Neutral, ambition, vocal, firm, confident, outspoken. Those are all simple words. The syntax issue is not too complicated. Mayor Hardy refuses to remain silent on controversy. So you have to figure out what combination of words would a person who is refusing to be silent use. This is a bit of a cultural question. How does somebody deal with refusing to remain silent? I suppose that somebody raised in Europe or the United States might deal with this a little bit differently than somebody who's raised in the South Seas or in parts of Asia. So there is a cultural context to the SAT. They don't like to admit that, but there is one. If you're refusing to remain silent, you're probably firm and outspoken, and those are easy words, and if you can understand the cultural context of this, number 3 was not so hard. Number 4 and number 5 are both level 5. That means only about 1 out of 5 people get these correct, and out of that 1 out of 5, most of the people who get these correct are people who are scoring in the high 600s or the 700s. There's all sorts of semantic and syntax issues on this. It's important that you understand the concept of rambling prose. It's generally writing that just doesn't make sense. It goes on endlessly and nonsensically. You put that together with the word unlike, and you clearly are looking for adjectives that would describe something that is not rambling prose. In relationship to the syntax, it's an easy issue. You want something that basically is comprehensive. That's another clue in the syntax here. It's both blank and blank. You've got a conjunction, the word and this conjunction joins two concepts, blank and comprehensive, so it's something that would bind those together. At this point, it becomes an issue of semantics. Interminable comes from the Latin prefix in, meaning not, and term, which is a root that we use in many words, terminate. Terminal as in terminal cancer, that's the end of all ends. It's used in a lot of words. The word complete is fairly simple. The word intractable, again the in there means not. Track is a very, very common root meaning to pull, such as a tractor pulls things. And you just can't change your mind. You're stuck. You can't be pulled out of anything. Intractable is stuck. Choice D is an interesting word. Banal is from the Old French, related to the word ban. Banal means something that's not fresh, it's trite, it's used over and over, it's overly simplistic, it's basically a bore, so it's always a negative word. Don't confuse banal with the word bane. However, both banal and bane are very negative words. Bane, B-A-N-E, comes from an Old English Germanic Old Norse root, which meant either to wound or kill or hurt. In present day English, it's somebody who ruins things, or the bane of my existence, something that hurts my existence. Choice E is succinct. Succinct is a word that means you can express something in just a few words, very concise. Sometimes it can mean maybe too precise, but not normally. It's normally a positive word. Compressed in a small area. And that's exactly what you want in this particular case. Clearly, in this case, if something is not rambling, if it's comprehensive, it says what it needs to say, comprehensive, but it's said in very few words, it's succinct. It's the opposite of being rambling. So choice E is the correct answer. Number 5 is, as I said before, a level 5. It's very complicated and it's almost purely semantics. There's not a lot of syntax here. You just have to know the words. The sentimentality of Tom's screenplay was so extreme that it bordered on, well, from that you can tell the blank means that it's way too sentimental, way too emotional. So you need a word that means really, really very, very emotional, almost too emotional. And if you know what the words mean, or some of them mean, you have a good guess possibly, but other than that you should probably skip it. Rectitude means the principle of being correct in your conduct, moral virtue, being upright. By upright I mean morally upright, correct in your... The word rectitude is very similar to the word erect, is similar in ways to other words such as erect, which if you erect a building, you build a building straight up. So we use it in quite a few other words. In this case though, the word rectitude has a more of a emotional or psychological impact rather than physical. Choice B is the word opulence. Opulence comes directly from the Latin, did not go through French or any other language. There was a time in English language history where people started adopting Latin words fairly directly. We didn't use the French derived words, and opulence is one of them. Opulence in Roman times meant wealth, and it basically still means that. It means abundance, wealth, riches, and so forth. Choice C is munificence. The word munificence means to be very generous. It comes from the Latin munus, meaning gift, and ficere, meaning to make a gift. And that's basically what you do if you're very generous. You give lots of gifts. It's a nice word. Choice D is mawkishness. I don't like that word. It's apparently I don't like a lot of the Old English or Germanic words. Mawkish is a word that comes from a word that actually meant maggot, and I have no idea how that happened. I'm sure it's an interesting story, but it basically means somebody who is too sentimental, who is emotionally weak and almost sickeningly sweet and almost nauseating. And of course, that's the right answer. Obviously, if you're being overly sentimental, you are being mawkish. So choice D was the correct answer. Choice E was serendipity. This word is a fancy word meaning getting lucky. If you have the ability to make discoveries by accidents or just having good fortune, you have serendipity. Oddly, although this is a fairly common word, it doesn't come from any language. It comes from, I believe, a novel from some fairy tales about princes and all sorts of strange stuff. I can't really remember, but it was from Serendip. So it's you have certain words like that that come from popular literature or popular culture. If you want to find another similar one to serendipity, try looking up the word maverick. Both of these words show up on the test a lot. So that ends this section's questions on sentence completions. I believe the sentence completions that only have 5 are some of the hardest because you really start having problems with number 3, and you certainly have problems with number 4 and 5. It's important to remember psychologically that 4 and 5 are things you can sacrifice unless you have to make a 700. Let's go on to some of the short readings.